Welcome, my friends, back to another Q&A here on my channel. Today, focused entirely on the Nintendo Switch 2. So, of course, we were going to be focusing on the Switch 2 today because we are officially in the 1-month countdown. It is less than a month away before the Nintendo Switch 2 finally releases, which means Nintendo's next generation is what begins in less than 1 month. That is crazy exciting, and if you watched my video, you might already know this. I was lucky enough to get a Nintendo Switch 2 pre-ordered from GameStop in person, so I'm going to be able to get it on the night of June 4th, because I'm on the west coast of the States, and so I'll be able to pick it up at 9 p.m. Like, the midnight release counts for the East Coast at midnight, which is 9 p.m. where I am. I get to snag it in person and meet a bunch of people in line and do the whole thing, and it's just crazy exciting to know that it's so close. But of course, I wanted to pick your guys' brains a little bit, so I asked you guys both on YouTube and on Blue Sky for some Q&A questions you just wanted to send my way for me to answer on a video regarding the Switch 2 and excitement and theories and desires, things you like, things you don't like, all that stuff. So I picked 4 questions from Blue Sky, 4 questions from YouTube, and I'm going to be answering those today. The first question on Blue Sky comes from Pro Nerdy, who says, you've mentioned before that you play docked most of the time with your Switch 1. Do you think with the bigger Joy-Con and 8-inch screen, you will play more in handheld? Obviously referring to the Nintendo Switch 2, and the answer is probably yes. I have touched on this in some prior videos and conversations that, and you're 100% correct, by the way, I play 99.999% docked with my Nintendo Switch for most of the time that I've had a Switch since launch day in 2017. I mean, it's literally to the point that I sometimes, and you guys will laugh at this, I really sometimes even forget that the Switch is portable because I think of it as another console hooked up to my TV. And I play with my Pro Controller on my TV. That's just what I do. Granted, I've traveled obviously a few times over the years, and whenever I travel, I bring my Switch. So that's been the few instances where I'm reminded, oh yeah, I take my Switch with me and I can play it on a plane or in a hotel room or whatever. So that has been a great reminder. But when I'm home, seriously, it's next to my Wii U, it's next to my PlayStation 5, my Xbox Series X. It is a TV home console to me entirely. Now, when it comes to the Switch 2, as I have mentioned, I am excited to see what the taller Joy-Cons, I don't want to call them bigger like you refer to them as, because as we know, they're still the same like thin little things, you know, the same thickness. It's just that they're taller because the screen is bigger, so the Switch itself is like bigger. And so that is something enticing to me, so I am excited to see if, even though I don't think it's going to be very comfortable, I don't like the little flat feeling of like holding a Switch, like it's like you're doing it like this almost, you know, with the triggers, and I don't know. I don't love that, but I am excited to see if the taller Joy-Cons makes it somewhat more comfortable to hold. And yeah, I'm excited for the screen. It's an 8-inch screen, and I know it's not an OLED screen, but apparently with the HDR, it just looks incredible. All the reports from folks who have played it in person say that even though it's not an OLED, it almost is as good as an OLED, and I've never even seen an OLED screen. So for me, I am curious to answer this question. I am curious to see if between the taller Joy-Cons and the more impressive screen, if it convinces me to play portably a little bit more often, and maybe I decide to lay in bed for an hour or two and game, as opposed to just staying up and sitting in my living room playing on my TV. So, not quite sure, but I'm so excited that maybe it changes how I play my Switch. Next Blue Sky question comes from Neon at itsneon2401, who says, what do you think the 2025 holiday title is? Personally, I'm not sure what to expect, because I was expecting 3D Mario until Donkey Kong was revealed. I don't think Hyrule Warriors has that kind of weight for a first-year holiday either. So this is a great question, and I think one that a lot of us are thinking about, because, you know, we have a couple of initial really exciting games with Mario Kart and Donkey Kong, as you mentioned here. We know Metroid Prime 4 is coming. That's the thing I'm laser focused on. The Pokemon game is also releasing at some point in the end of the year, which is a Switch 1 title, getting a Switch 2 edition. And then you mentioned Hyrule Warriors, and I agree with you that I don't think Hyrule Warriors really does carry a holiday. Not in the same year when we know Pokemon and Metroid Prime 4 are releasing. So what becomes the ideal holiday title? And for the longest time, I would have agreed with you and thought that a 3D Mario game makes the most sense. And I still think it's very possible. I think that the first Nintendo Direct we get after the Switch 2 launches could very well reveal the big holiday title. And that could be a 3D Mario game. But as you bring up, because you mentioned Donkey Kong, and I've started to think about this over the past few weeks as well. It's like, I think that they maybe want the platforming focus to be on Donkey Kong and not to be on Mario. Now, Donkey Kong coming out in July and a new 3D Mario game coming out like in October, obviously the buzz around Donkey Kong will have subsided, and that does leave plenty of room for people to be excited about a new Mario game a few months later in October or November or whatever that looks like. So technically they could certainly get away with it, and both Donkey Kong and Mario, if they're separated by 4 or 5 months, they each have their time to shine, sure. But the reason I am moving away from expecting Mario now is because I feel like Nintendo also has to think about how do they keep selling people on the Switch 2 each subsequent year. So this year, in the launch year, between Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, and Metroid Prime 4, that's 3 massive, very exciting first-party titles to carry out basically half of 2025. Because again, the Switch launches in June. So literally, that's already halfway through the year anyway. So 3 massive first-party titles, throw in Pokemon, by the way, 4 massive titles over the course of half of 2025. You've kind of got everything covered. And then you also bring up Hyrule Warriors. I can't remember. Was that confirmed to be a 2025 title? Because if that was, there's a 5th game. So I don't know that they need something as big as Mario to even sell people on the Switch 2 in 2025. Announcing a 3D Mario for 2026, to me, even though I want it as soon as possible, from a business standpoint, that becomes a smart move because it already starts to let people know, man, the launch year is great. I got Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, and Metroid. And now I already know next year in 2026, there's going to be a 3D Mario game. Like, wow, the Switch 2 is promising me a very strong future of titles. That's what it'll tell us if they announce Mario for next year. So it's a very long way for me to say that while Mario is a possibility for the holiday, I don't think it's going to be their big holiday game, probably for that reason. So then what becomes their holiday title? Maybe they just rely on Pokemon. I also think Metroid, man. Look, I believed Metroid would have made a strong launch title. Clearly that's not happening. Now that we know it's not a launch title, maybe the September or October big game becomes Metroid Prime 4. I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a huge hit, especially the Switch 2 edition. And so, I don't know. I know people will push back saying Metroid isn't big enough to carry a holiday, but I think Metroid Prime 4, with all of the hype and buzz around that game, combined with Pokemon, those 2 games enough, I think, can carry Nintendo's holiday for their launch year with the promise of Mario next year in 2026. I'm making this scenario up in my head, but to me, that all works. There's also the chance that they surprise us with the first-party game they haven't announced. Maybe that Kirby Air Rider game. I don't really think that's a big holiday title, but that's one that's technically on the plate. Maybe they announce, I don't know, a new Fire Emblem game. But again, these aren't big holiday titles. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with it. I think Metroid and Pokemon are probably enough to carry their holiday this year. Next Blue Sky question comes from one of my best and oldest in real life friends, Brian, one of my best buddies from back home in Denver. He goes by Fire Bobcat on Blue Sky, and he asked me a question, and of course I have to answer this for him. So he asked me, top Switch 1 games you'd like to see get Switch 2 enhancements that haven't been confirmed. So, thank you for the question, Brian. And I do have a couple of obvious answers for this. The first one will surprise no one, and it's Metroid Dread. I would love to see some kind of enhanced version of Metroid Dread for the Switch 2. Maybe even something that gets some form of, like, DLC. I mean, it's tricky because you have to follow a narrative in Metroid, so I don't know how they could do that. But, Kirby is getting the Switch 2 edition with DLC. why couldn't Metroid Dread? So Metroid Dread is the obvious one. Another one I'd like to see is Astral Chain. I'd like to see Bayonetta. Those two Platinum Games titles would really, really benefit from some improved frame rate and resolution. Those are two incredible games, and I'd love to see them get a Switch 2 Edition update. Pikmin 4 is another big one from Nintendo. The game is damn near perfect as it is, but sure, make it look a little bit better, make it play a little bit better. Again, that's another game I think primed for extra content, and I think Pikmin 4 could be a good one. And then, I think the only other one that really jumps to mind, again, that isn't already confirmed, because like the 2D Zelda games are getting the performance update, which they need. I think I would probably say Luigi's Mansion 3. It's another game that's great and looks great, but improve the visuals and performance, maybe some new content. I'm going to keep asking for content with Switch 2 editions going forward. And that's a game that I think would work really well and probably do really well if they released the Switch 2 enhancement. And I'm going to do another question by one of my best and closest in real life friends, Chris, who goes by Hatrick Swayze, both on Blue Sky and on Twitch. He streams a lot on Twitch. So please go check his, I don't know, what is Twitch? A channel? Does he have a channel? Whatever his Twitch page is, I'll link it below. And he asks me a question as well. He says, is it me or are the launch titles pretty underwhelming compared to previous console launches? And, you know, I have touched on this a little bit. It is a good question because, yeah, I do kind of think it's a tad underwhelming. Now, it's not bad because Mario Kart is going to be incredible, but it is a little bit underwhelming. I mean, the only games at launch that I'm interested in for the Switch 2 is Mario Kart World, which I know is going to be fantastic, so great. We have a perfect killer app launch title. And then the other game is Cyberpunk 2077, but I already own and have played Cyberpunk, so it's more just to buy it to support what CD Projekt Red is doing with the game, and because I love the game. So it's like, sure, I'll double dip on a game I really like to be able to play it on my Switch 2 and compare and contrast with the PS5 version. But that's it for me. And even Mario Kart, look, man, it's going to be maybe a 10 out of 10 Mario Kart racing game, but it is a racing game. It's a multiplayer-focused game. I really wish, you know, something single-player focused like Metroid Prime 4 or Donkey Kong was also coming out at launch, so I could have another brand new single-player adventure to experience on my Switch 2. Playing Breath of the Wild, exploring this huge brand new Zelda world with the first Switch was an incredible way to kick off that generation in that console. And so Mario Kart's going to be amazing, but again, it's focused on racing and multiplayer, and I will be missing some kind of single-player game right away. Now, I am thrilled that Donkey Kong is only a month later, so the wait will be very short. So all things considered, I'm fine with it. I'm just happy to have a Switch 2 in Mario Kart. But I do feel like it is missing some other additional, especially Nintendo content at launch, you know? And you look at the way like the GameCube launched, or I mean, the Wii U had a great launch. I don't care what anyone frickin' says. The Wii U had so many games in the first few months, you know, first and third party. I had a great time with the Wii U. So that, yeah, I think ultimately, look, Switch 2 is going to be fantastic. I know the library long term will be amazing, but the launch, it's really just Mario Kart for me. I'm going to be waiting a month for Donkey Kong. Okay, jumping over to YouTube, we have a question from Time Buddy, who says, since we got the new UI/icons on Switch 1's home screen, and it's mostly the same on Switch 2, how do you feel about getting basically the same UI for the successor? And do you think we're getting themes or at least more color options besides white and dark? So I'm probably alone in thinking this, or at least a very rare person who thinks this, but I kind of don't really care all that much about the UI of the Switch 2. And let me even say it this way. I don't really care that it's mostly the same as the Switch 1's. That's mostly what I mean. Because there's two things. One, it's just the UI, and as long as it lets me play games and navigate how I want to, that's fine. And two, I think the Switch's UI, yes, it is boring. I'll never deny that. It is boring, and I did like the snazzier UI of like the Wii U, for example. God, I love the Wii U so much. And the UI was great, and the eShop was fantastic, and the music, and yes, I am with you guys on that, but I love that the Switch's UI is really simple, and it's really fast and snappy and easy to navigate. Now, the eShop sucks, And I think they've confirmed the eShop is going to be vastly improved on the Switch 2, so that is good. I don't even use the eShop very often because I don't really buy digital games. But I've obviously used it occasionally for some things, and it is slow and clunky and just a mess, and it sucks. So as long as they improve the eShop for the few times I'll use it, I don't really care that it's mostly the same because, like I said, it's fast and simple. And all I want to do is turn on my Switch 2 and then start playing the game I want to play. That's all I care about. So I'm fine with all that. Themes, yes, they would be smart to give us more themes. And yes, I think they will eventually release more themes because that has been a complaint since day one. They never changed it on the Switch 1. So I feel like for the Switch 2, they're going to listen to folks. And even if it takes a year for the first new themes to roll out, eventually, I personally do believe we will get some. Next question comes from the Speed Forever, which I'm pretty sure I've answered one of your questions before, so here we are again. And they ask, is there a third-party game you think might push the Switch 2 hardware? If so, which one? And yes, I definitely think so. Obviously, we already know with Cyberpunk 2077, I think that's going to be a game that's going to really showcase and push the Switch 2 hardware. So that's really exciting. The Dusk Bloods is a third-party game. It's exclusive to the Switch 2, but it's a From Software title. I think that has great chance to push the Switch 2 hardware. I love what we've seen from the first trailer. I can't wait. It looks beautiful. It looks fantastic. And then two other ones that I think might be contentious amongst you guys. Look, Grand Theft Auto 6. I think it might come to the Switch 2. And I'm not a Grand Theft Auto guy. I don't even plan on playing the game. But I feel like Rockstar realizes there's going to be an advantage, even if it takes a while to release on the Switch 2. Let's say it's not same day and date. They realize that they're not going to want to miss the Nintendo fan base with this one. And it would be really great to see that title come, even though I'm not a fan of the franchise. It would be a huge win for the Switch 2 and for the gamers who want to play it on the Switch 2. So if they find a way to make that game run on the Switch 2, and I know people will push back saying it's not possible, I don't believe that. If they make that work, that's a huge one. And then the other one, a game that not a lot of people are talking about, but that we all but know is coming to Switch 2 this year, is Call of Duty. Okay, so the 2025 Call of Duty game is all but confirmed to be coming this year. We already know that we're getting 10 years of Call of Duty support for the Nintendo Switch consoles, and we didn't get it last year, so I feel like this year, for this brand new Switch 2, we're going to be getting this year's Call of Duty, and I think that's another third-party title that, if I'm correct, and it does come out this year, will be another great showcase to push the Switch 2 hardware. And that would be very exciting. I would consider playing it on the Switch 2 because I do enjoy Call of Duty. So, yeah, I think those are my third-party answers for pushing the hardware. Next question comes from My Nickname 1, who says, why is there so much misinformation spread around the Switch 2? From $90 game prices over every game is a key card to Switch 2 editions only being a download code with Switch 1 games. Or stuff like Switch 2 is overpriced because it has less power than the PS5 for the same price, completely neglecting portability. That's a great question, and it is certainly frustrating to see what we've all seen with all of this, quote-unquote misinformation. And you bring up great examples with like the game prices and everything about the game key codes. Everything with even the Switch 2 editions, people not sure what's happening with those. And why has it been this way? Well, the surface level dramatic answer for those of you who like tea is because sure, there are a lot of people who are part of the fanboy console wars and they hate Nintendo because they like PlayStation or they like Xbox, and everyone is always fighting in these console wars, and I think it's dumb. But a lot of people who do like to engage in that stuff and spread the kind of rhetoric that gets people fired up on one side or the other. This even includes the overly positive Nintendo fanboys as well, by the way. It goes both ways. I think that a lot of the people who just want to tear Nintendo down or the Switch 2 down, they're going to really go in hard on the stuff that seems negative or even the stuff that is negative, and over-dramatize it and oversell it to people, or even just lie or not look into the details and spread that misinformation. So I think that that's the surface level part of it. That's the tea, is is the console war people who are pro PlayStation and anti Nintendo, just trying to stir up shit. Okay, so that's out there as well. But forget all that noise. The real reason, I think, is because Nintendo wasn't prepared for just how much messaging they needed to get out there. And I think that the current regime, Furukawa and the folks overseeing Nintendo, I think that they're approaching it in a different way than the era of Iwata and Reggie from Nintendo of America would do it, where they understood how to be pro-gamer and pro-consumer, and they understood how to communicate that messaging. The current guys are a little bit more corporate suits focused, which is a shame. I'm still okay with it because I think we're seeing that the Switch 2 is a great machine, and we're seeing great games. We're getting Mario Kart, Metroid, and Donkey Kong. I mean, that shows me that they're still making the right kinds of games. So I'm still okay based on the products they're making. The business decisions from the people running Nintendo right now, I don't think they communicate in gamer speak. That's such a corny way to say it, but I don't think they have the same philosophy in talking to the gamer the way Iwata and Reggie did. Basically, kind of doubling down on that sentiment. And look, Doug Bowser, he's just not the same kind of personality and force that Reggie was. I don't really have a positive or negative opinion on Doug Bowser. It's more just complete apathy. So take that for what it is. It's just like, yeah, he's there. He's the guy running Nintendo of America. He's fine. He doesn't really do anything good or bad to me. It's just whatever. Whereas with Reggie, it was only a net positive. Things were great. He's the one who fought for Wii Sports to be a pack-in in North America. He knew how to talk to the gamer and get gamers excited. That is not Furukawa. That is not Doug Bowser. So all the stuff with the game prices, Nintendo made a lot of interesting decisions with the Switch 2, with the game key cards, with the Switch 2 editions, with the pricing of $80 for Mario Kart in the States and the higher prices in other parts of the world. And because in the Nintendo Direct on April 2nd for the Switch 2, there's a lot of stuff that they didn't bring up there. That's probably the biggest factor. That is the first thing they did wrong, quote unquote. That where they left so much out for mystery and speculation, and then they were trying to clear things up with messaging that was coming out literally in the hours after that Direct, that was basically when the shitstorm started. And prices and pre-order dates and game key cards and Switch 2 edition stuff and everything started getting out there, and it was for like days, it was like everyone was hearing conflicting information. And so I think Nintendo not choosing to communicate that stuff in the Direct was probably the biggest culprit. And then right behind that is going to be the fact that the current regime doesn't really communicate the same information the same way Iwata did. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a long answer, but personally I think that's where a lot of it comes from. And the last question for today on YouTube, of course, I had to get at least one Metroid question in. Coming from Zebus14, who says, when do you expect the next 2D Metroid? Now, this doesn't seem like a Switch 2 question on the surface, but to me it's a Switch 2 question because the next 2D Metroid will absolutely be coming out on the Switch 2, more than likely exclusively on the Switch 2. And so, here's the thing. I absolutely think there is another 2D Metroid game being developed. I've discussed it many times over the years, since Metroid Dread released in 2021. Lots of reason and signs pointing to Mercury Steam being the one to make that game. I don't know why Nintendo wouldn't have them make another 2D Metroid game. Maybe they've got a different team making it, who knows. But regardless, whether it's Mercury Steam, whether it's somebody else, I think it's being made. And so the question is it Metroid 6? Or is it some kind of another spin-off game, like how Metroid Other M was like a spin-off in the 2D sort of continuity? Or would it be a remake? A lot of people say it's time to remake Super Metroid. They remade Metroid 1, they remade Metroid 2. Why not move forward and remake Super Metroid? And, I've kind of had a changing philosophies on if I believe that they would ever do that or not over the years. But right now, as of today, the pendulum has swung to the point that, yeah, I kind of do think they would consider remaking Super Metroid, I'll say. So, whether it's Metroid 6 or Super Metroid Remake, I think that a new 2D Metroid game is being made. And with Metroid Prime 4 being this year, I think it could come as early as next year. And I say that, you guys, because Mercury Steam released Metroid Dread 4 years ago. Oh, well, it'll be 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. Yeah, 3.5, 4 years ago, right? In October of 2021. And so if sometime in 2026, summer or fall, we get Metroid 6 or we get the next 2D Metroid, and especially if it's Mercury Steam developing it, that's 5 years. That's plenty time to make a new 2D Metroid game. And maybe Nintendo is thinking on the Switch 2, we're going to continue the Metroid renaissance that we started on Switch 1 by making Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered, and we'll do Metroid Prime 4 one year, and then we'll immediately follow it up with Metroid 6 or the next 2D Metroid games. Maybe they're willing to start really hammering home that Switch 2 will be a Metroid machine, and we're going to be making and releasing tons of stuff. I also think that Metroid Primes 2 and 3 HD will also come to the Switch 2, or maybe cross-gen Switch 1 and Switch 2. So because of that, that's why I think it could be as early as next year that we get the next 2D Metroid game. If it's not, I think 2027 also makes sense, because now we have to expect Nintendo to start stacking the next many years of Metroid games, of any game for the Switch 2. So they have to start showing us new Mario games and Metroid games and the next Zelda game and the next Fire Emblem game. Maybe we get F-Zero or Star Fox. Maybe we get Kid Icarus, the next Animal Crossing, the next Smash Brothers, the next Splatoon, the next Xenoblade or Luigi's Mansion, Just name your Nintendo franchises. They need to start packing. Every year has to have a couple of big Nintendo franchises. So I think that a 2D Metroid game is one of those. So could be as early as next year, but I feel like 2026 or 2027 is probably the ideal target, because we've got Prime 4 this year. We had Metroid Dread in 2021. We're going to need the next follow-up Metroid sometime soon after that. So that's my thought. And so with that wraps up the Q&A surrounding the Switch 2. Thank you guys for asking questions. Of course, I limited this one. I made this one smaller, only 8 questions. I normally try to do like 10 to 15. But of course, this probably still turned out to be a 40-minute video because I have a lot to say. I love the questions you guys ask me. If you want to be a part of these in the future, make sure you're following me on Blue Sky. Of course, be subscribed to the YouTube channel. Hello. And I do still tweet on Twitter a little bit, so feel free to follow me there if you want as well. But this was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for your great questions, and I will see you next time.